Hey, welcome everybody here to talk about AI evaluation. So this is one of the hottest things that is happening in AI product management and AI engineering all around the planet. Organizations all over the world are trying to figure this piece out. And so Rob and I thought that we would shoot this video to talk about how it is that we have been applying AI evaluation, starting with the error analysis process to Rob's open world game called The Disconnected Frontier. Now, The Disconnected Frontier is a game, has multiple versions that are available now. We're going to actually be taking a look at the classic edition, and we have this loaded up on the screen. So this is an homage, if you will, to the text-based games of the 80s, but with a twist. So basically what happens is this game is grounded on an extensive body of work around game lore. So there are some set characters, there are some set themes that are happening within the lore of this game. But the game actually generates and unfolds because it's powered by large language models on the back end. So as a user plays it, it's a custom gameplay every time because it's actually being generated based on the lore and based on the variability of the large language models underneath. And in this case, we want to know from the AI evaluation process whether or not, as the game is unfolding for a player, if it's actually staying grounded within its lore or not. And there are some other consistencies that we would like for the game to actually follow. And so the question in this process, this evaluation process, is can we evaluate through this error analysis technique on whether or not the game is actually staying true to where it should follow the rules, where it should deviate, and where it should be grounded in the world that is encompassed in the corpora that forms or informs the game lore. So, Rob, can we go ahead? We just want to show people like this opening screen of the game. You're going to see this is the very beginning. If you're a new player, and as a matter of fact, Rob has generously made this game available and some of the trace data available online. But when you start the game, you're going to see that you put in the prompt and it starts and it gives you a whole background to the game, and then it gives you your first round of choices as a player. And so Rob calls this beginning piece the opening gambit, right? So this is the first scene that it is that a player sees, and it changes every time, right? So every time you go in here, that is actually generated by the large language models that are driving the game. And so what we want to do now that we've shown you and told you a little bit about the game, we want to show you some of the great tooling that Rob has created in order to be able to perform this AI evaluation, starting with error analysis around the data that's been generated from about 100 and it's about 150 different gameplays
Yeah,
so
give or
far,
take.
Rob? Is that what's
Give or
in
take,
here?
yeah.
Yeah,
In that
give or
ballpark.
take. So what do we have in the dashboard here? Can you give us
Yeah, so what I can do is I can pull by, a date range and how many results. So right now I'm just grabbing the last 10 records. I have a set of reporting tools that I can run on the records, but we won't be focusing on that. We're going to be focusing on the actual traces themselves. And this is the last 10 entries. And, we'll just open up one of them as an example. Okay. And then I'll throw it back to you.
so when you talk about traces, these are the last 10 opening gambits, the last
Well, not
10
just the opening
beginnings.
gambit, the entire playthrough. So the opening gambit,
Okay.
obviously being the first turn, I extract the opening gambits. But in this particular case, I have visibility to the entire game. So in this particular case, this was a lengthy game, right? The person did multi-turns.
Okay.
Okay.
And how do you know that? Like, how did you know in the dashboard that you've created here, in order to even understand, like, how can you tell, like, when there's been more user interaction versus somebody just started the game and then didn't continue?
Well, to your point, when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of traces, having something coded that can run in a microsecond to give you visibility. I just did a number of message count, and depending on a range of message counts. I determine if it's a high quality, aka high engagement, or low quality, meaning no engagement. And that's your ABC, right? So A would be visibly very easy to see which ones are the high engagement ones. It's these three here. Which ones are the low engagements? These three, and this one a partial engagement of 5 messages. So that's a scenario where just having a little bit of insight stops me from having to literally go and open and close and open and close and open and close. And that's exactly what I had to do. And literally with this small change, I know exactly where I need to go to. And I can have this sorted and grouped and so forth and filtered.
In the particular dashboard. So you've created this dashboard that's based on this trace data, and the trace data is basically every interaction per session that a player, in this, a user, and in this case a game, somebody playing the game, can actually do that. So, and then you can tell just at a glance, because you've programmed this. So the letter scoring, so A, B, or C, the color coding, and the message count, that's just all hard coded into the dashboard. Is that right?
Well, it's coded into the code. There's nothing hard coded. It's all programmably calculated. But yes, the dashboard has, as part of the pull process, it basically does a conversation count and then uses that conversation count to determine the color, the letter, and the number of messages that are displayed in the dashboard. And then the conversation ID, that's a unique identifier related to the conversation itself. So that way, like I said, if I only wanted to see the high engagement ones or the low engagement ones, it's a simple filter or a scroll. Or like I said, if I'm just working on the high engagements, I'm selecting those three, and I can ignore the rest.
So even as a product manager, like looking at a product, like in this case, the game, like I can see at a glance, like what the user engagement is,
Okay,
right? Like if we're scrolling through and looking at just even a list of hundreds or if
well, to
not
your point,
thousands.
I'll do that one really
Yeah,
quickly. I'm going to pull up the last
yeah,
100,
yeah.
and that'll really give you a sense. So there's 100 sessions there, including, this is the one I literally just did a second ago. There's my try the password, right? So you saw that at the beginning of the demo. So that is as
Uh-huh.
fresh as it could be. Then that's basically a C indicates pretty much just an opening gambit is there. B tells me the
Uh-huh.
person did at least a second turn. And then the A's are the ones where the person went on. But, at a glance, if I had to go through 150 traces to know which ones to
Right.
look at, it's very easy to tell. And
And why
that's the
is it
thing is,
important for us to be, oh, sorry, Rob, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, what was the question?
So why don't we just automate this, right? Like, why don't we just do some kind of like fancy automation? Why is it important to get in here and understand your trace data as a human being? Like, why should it make
Well,
sense for engineers and product managers?
I've said this before and I'll say it again. I'll use the polite way of saying, know your effing data, and if
Right.
you don't know your effing data, um, you're not a product manager. Simple as that. You're not a data scientist. You're not a developer. You're basically someone coding with no context as to what you're coding on. So it all starts with the data. So I can tell, as an example, why was there no engagement there? Well, is my opening gambit needs to be different, and all of this type of stuff. So you got to look at the data. You got to see what the people are, how they're using the tool. It's simple as that. And then only by seeing actual usage are you then able to start getting into situations where you see patterns, right? So I'm just pulled up 3 right now. Chapter commencement recap. Okay, fine. Chapter recap. Well, there's a completely different format difference, right? Compare that to the other one. That one just says recap, current chapter, path to the arcade, looking at the next one. The scene unfolds. Well, that's not bolded unlike the other ones, right? Look at our decisions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's look at a couple of other ones here as an example. One,
So
two,
in this
yeah.
case, like you could look across, you could isolate all the C's as an example and see where the variation is, and then see you're looking for patterns.
And that's the
So
thing.
the error,
I'm just using this as an eyesight, right? So I'm not looking for intrinsic. I'm looking for stuff that I'll just blindly see at a first
right,
glance, and even just by picking a sample of a few, I can start seeing patterns, right? And one of the
right.
patterns I know we're not seeing it right here, but let me pull one up as an example if I can find one. Here's an example, right? 1, 2 options, and then it goes into what will you do, right? Like it's not even in a number change. It kind of gave you 2. Your choices are this, but what are you going to do? It's completely different from each one. Your choices. Look at that structure, completely different. Like there's mass variations across all of these scenarios, and you wouldn't know that unless you actually started really getting into the code, right? And that's what I'm saying. I'm just skimming through here, and I'm seeing major differences in the structure, right? So if this was presenting financial data or legal data or anything of value that consistency is the case, well, I can tell right now that there's a gap in my prompt because I'm not telling it how to structure it. I know that from a fact because back then I wasn't. But how it decides, like that is like garbled to me compared to the other examples. So by looking at all of these samples, and in this particular case, it's a live sampling of everything, but I can pick a subset of this and extract that sample. You start seeing patterns, and then you start going, okay, well, are these patterns on purpose, meaning my prompt is telling me to be divergent in the patterns, or does it not have any construct? And as a result, every time that it's inferring, it's making stuff up because I'm not being specific enough, right? So I can tell right now where I'm not being specific. I'm not specific in my titling. My headers are all over the place. My groupings are all over the place. My path selection. So every time a person was playing this in the earlier versions of the game, because we're going back to, October 13th here, I can see the user would have a completely different experience. So when a person calls up and says, I'm struggling with your game, not only is the opening gambit completely unique, but the gameplay is completely unique. And that part should not be unique. That part should be consistent. So going through the traces, focusing on long traces, on short traces, gives you the ability at a glance to see what's happening. It's the ghost in the machine, right? So many systems have ghosts in the machine that we have no visibility on. This gives me the visibility to the ghost in the machine. And when you're dealing with LLMs, there's a lot of black magic going on. Wouldn't it be nice, as we've talked about before, to know what model and what temperature and when that was actually done, so that when you're looking through your trace, you go, you know what? What happened in October? Oh, we did a major update to the prompt. Okay. Well, I'm noticing these things happening that weren't happening before because I've been doing my analysis over time and I've been generating my reports and I can see patterns over time. So in a production system, you need not just your safeguards for the deployment, but your safeguards for, did the model change affect how the prompt gets done? Did a slight modification to your prompt completely change the engagement factor? Or did you literally just see a bunch of rage quitting over the course of days because it came out in French, or whatever, right? So why is that, And I know why these ones are short, but even then, like, look at the variations there. All of a sudden it's introducing these little square blocks, right? All that is fine. A user would never complain about that. But as a product manager, I'm seeing a wide diversity. And that's because, the prompt at the time was as simple as a prompt. It's a 3-year-old prompt, right? Whereas if you compare that to the newer gameplay, so going back to, and I'm just going to do a quick refresh, let's say the last 5 records, just so we've got some shortness here. These prompts here are consistently different. Okay. How it comes back now, it's very consistent. 1, 2, 3. I can pull up any one of these ones and it'll be 1, 2, 3, because that's a change that I made, right? Literally the format and the structure now is so much cleaner. There's no formatting and bolding and whatnot in this particular prompt, but that's something that I might want to go back and look at. It's like, I don't see enough bolding here, right? So the next iteration of my prompt, when I look at that and go, you know what, I've got the structure right, but I could probably use a bit more spacing, some bolding of the headers there would probably take care of that space, and I'm now running this on GPT-5, right? So there's now a major change to the prompt. How much of the prompt change changed the formatting. You know what I mean? So as the 4.1 maybe was very keen to throw bolds and markdown willy-nilly, whereas 5.0 out of the box, I can tell you it does not, unless you tell it to. Right. So now all of a sudden, I'm not just seeing a variety across my prompts and a variety across my models, but I can compare. Okay, on this data was this model, on this data was this model, on this data was this prompt, and on this data was this prompt. Take those samples, look at them initially, but then you start running evals and LLM as a judge and all of those other. And that's what this section up here allows me to do, is it allows me to do dynamic analysis across a wide sample of selections. And now I can say, okay, what is the narrative path analysis across all of these things? Now that would really only work on a long tail conversation, right? So for me to run that, I'm just going to do a fetch of a few more records here. If I were to run that on these ones, I would have really good narrative analysis because there's actually a process. But if I ran that same prompt on that one, the narrative path would basically say the guy opened up and everything was fine, but nothing else, right? So knowing where to run those dynamic prompts on very specific things is very handy. And this goes back to the very nice feature of being able to isolate from a large swath of data that I don't necessarily need to look at. But now I know that these three here had, a fairly decent amount of usage. So when this thing comes back in about 15 seconds, because it is a large amount, I can now look from one to the other. What was the initial setup? What was the entry decision, the Oracle challenge? These are all things that are, and I can tell what the person picked in each of the stages, right? On the Oracle challenge, which is a very specific thing to that playthrough, right? I compare that to their one. Completely different scenario. And there's a bit of diversity in the output because it's based on obviously the gameplay as well. But this is a prompt like no other. If I saw discrepancies in this debrief, I would make modifications to this prompt based on what I see, right? So right off the bat, if let's say I wanted the current status and key narrative impact to be always the last bit, well, it's not over here. That tells me visually I need to introduce that as an example or as a requirement in the prompt so that now when I'm looking at multiple of these records, I should see it almost like a matrix where I'm looking at the same part of the report. I should be seeing the same type of information. That's not the case. So this is another example where you have to run your evals on your evals. So
right, and be able to see. And again, so then in here, like just in wrapping up this scenario and this video today, like the whole point is, number one, know your data. You got to get into the weeds on this before it is that you can automate, right? Now, we're not saying don't automate, like later on. It's not possible to evaluate all your data against hundreds of thousands, if not millions of records in a production system, but you've got to get to know it, especially early in the development of a particular product. The second thing is need to do it in a systematic and structured kind of way, and that's probably going to require custom tooling. So you didn't buy this dashboard, you created this dashboard,
I
and
vibe coded this dashboard. That's
yeah,
the beauty
right, you
is
totally vibe coded this dashboard.
you don't have to be limited to be able to custom your own
Right.
dashboards anymore. You are empowered to say, here's my data. How do I personally want to look at that data? That's something product managers never had the ability to do before.
Right, for sure. And then to your point, then you're able to even iterate the dashboard and be like, okay, it would be helpful if the dashboard also included. And I just want to stop right there, Rob, where you've got the annotation down in the footer, like on any of the traces, because I
Yes.
think that that's really important. And I think it's better in outside of the A's. I think it's the older one. So here you can see, and again, like you specifically put that into the trace data to make sure that it always tags it, it
Yeah.
always annotates what was the large language model that was used, what was the temperature setting, and then what was the timestamp, so that you've got that kind of information as part of the analysis. And just the last thing on this too is, like you said, you also then can delineate between, okay, this is what the trace data looked like, and this is how the game was playing when it was GPT 4.1, that large language model versus GPT 5. And if you wanted to do like a what if analysis, you could also like change it to another model, like,
Mhm.
Claude Sonnet 4.5 or whatever, and be able to say, like, okay, does this improve the gameplay or not? But you could do that kind of what if analysis and test out different LLMs, and you would still have a baseline to compare within this dashboard. What did it look like beforehand? And then what does it look like now, given the changes that you've implemented?
Well, and I'll take that one step further using that custom section that I was working on while we were talking. That allows me to do iterations on my prompts in real time. So going back to what we were saying earlier, in the span of just this little bit of our conversation, I found deltas between my analysis, and I wanted it to be a bit better. So I took one of the examples from a previous run, gave it to the custom prompt saying, this is a good layout. Now I ran it again, and look, all of a sudden, just by modifying my prompt, I've now got cohesion across those three records where literally 5 minutes ago it was completely different, right? So the
The
ability to
catch-all.
then look
Yeah.
at that and go, okay, that's fine. I want this to be changed. I want this to be changed. I have the ability to literally mock up my prompts right here in the dashboard using real data. And I said, okay, now if I were to take that same data and I ran it with this, what would that look like? Now I've got not just an evaluation tool, but I've got a refinement tool that is using the gameplay as its repository that I can run new prompts again to flush out what the larger prompt should be. And literally, it's a text field. This could literally be anything I want, right? I can drop examples and so forth. And once I've got that dialed in, I can then say, okay, fine. That is the prompt that I'm going to use.
Right. So you can actually test a
I
hypothesis
can
of the
test the
response.
hypothesis. I literally did it.
Right.
I
Right.
noticed something I didn't like, and I
Right.
was able to adjust and fix that. No coding needed, right? I literally just
Right.
have my little custom analysis for that purpose. So to your point, if all of a sudden I want all of these reports to be in French instead, or an English Canadian versus US Canadian, or US English versus Canadian English, I can make those changes by running this, and now I've got
And help
literally
them.
a custom
Right.
tool that could be for anybody.
Right. You're testing out you're testing it out without actually touching the production code
Correct.
yet.
Yeah,
So
I'm
testing out
literally
that
using
refinement
past
before.
traces for future proofing.
Right. It's awesome.
There you
I'm
go.
Trish Yule.
I'm Rob Lavigne.
Thanks so much.
Okay, stop.